Good afternoon, everybody. You know, the fireside chats tend to be the highlight of the events, and we've been very, very lucky to convince Adam to join us this afternoon. I think Patricia is more qualified than I am in introducing Adam. So, Patricia, we want to give a few words about Adam's background?
Sure. So, Adam, it's a great honor to introduce you. Adam is the Executive Director of Fortune and co-chair of Fortune Brainstorm Tech. He wrote the 2012 bestseller Inside Apple and published this year another bestseller, Wild Ride: Inside's Uber Quest for World Domination. I know our EP class got the book yesterday. Adam was born in Illinois and has been a San Francisco Bay Area resident for many years. Much of his career has been in technology. He provides great insights around leadership, technology, and innovation. He has a great pulse about the top issues in technology, opportunities, and challenges. I've known Adam for about 10 years. I get to see him in Aspen, and he is the only person that can get me on a bike to take a 26-mile ride at 8,000 feet height. So with that said, Adam, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Please go ahead, Adam.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I speak in front of audiences all the time, and I'm on television every week, and I'm very nervous right now because Patricia demanded that I speak a little Spanish to you. Pero no puedo hablar español muy bien, pero trato. And yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. My daughter, who's in 5th grade, has been in, up until this year, was in a Spanish immersion program for her whole education, and she's fluent in Spanish. And yet she won't speak in front of her mom and me. And we were in Spain this summer, in Andalusia, and we had a very nice time. And so I said to her, well, if you won't speak Spanish, then I will. And I took a lot of Spanish, so I can't communicate articulately, but I can communicate, to her great embarrassment. And I think I surprised her. I know I surprised you when I said something. I think it was that when I was 22 years old, I traveled through Mexico from Ciudad Juarez in the north to Ciudad Cuauhtémoc in the south by land the whole way, mostly by bus. So that was very exciting. I was very aware while I was doing it that I would never do this again. In fact, I never did it again. Yeah. In a moment, I'm gonna go really fast through a presentation that I give about my current book, which is about Uber. I heard the chuckles on the subtitle, Inside Uber's Quest for World Domination. It is a little funny now in retrospect. It wasn't quite so funny 12 or 18 months ago. Before I start, I just wanted to say, you know, I had an emotional moment out in the hallway. There's a football jersey for Bill Campbell of Intuit, who is a great friend of mine, and it reminds me I'm here because Patricia and Alberto asked me to be here. And for me, you know, business is all about personal relationships and the joy of the friendships that we have, and seeing the journey, the jersey of that guy out there, who, if you don't know about him, have a look at the jersey, and I think there might be a bio up there. He's somebody who was very special and very important in my career for 20 years, up until his passing last summer. And I think he'd be tickled to know that I was here giving a talk at Intuit, because he knew me before I was standing up in front of audiences trying to speak Spanish. Okay, my talk is about my wild ride, writing a book about Uber. I'll just tell you very briefly a little bit about myself. As Patricia noted, I've been in the Valley for 20 years. But before that, I was born and raised in Chicago. I worked in Washington, D.C. when I was a young pup, and I worked in Chicago, and I did a year in Japan as a fellow at a Japanese newspaper in the English language. For quite a while, I spoke better Japanese than I did Spanish. Now I can't really speak either again. And then I was in Chicago for a little while again, where I was an editor. I hated being an editor because I was in the office all day, not talking to real people. I was only talking to journalists. And I had an opportunity to come out to the San Jose Mercury News in 1997 to write about tech stocks, to start a brand new tech stocks column for the Mercury News, which was, you know, the best professional experience of my life, because I was communicating to a very eager audience of technology people, of engineers about the stock market, and to a very eager audience on Wall Street who wanted to understand Silicon Valley. And so I became the non-tech finance guy in Silicon Valley. The last time I was at Intuit might have been something like 19 or 20 years ago. It was a lot smaller than it is today. When things got bad, I jumped to a place called TheStreet.com at the height of the dot-com bubble. I was there for 2 glorious years, and then I sought the safe harbor of Fortune, where I've been ever since. And I've done a lot of things at Fortune over the years. Started off primarily as a magazine writer, got very involved in our conference franchises. Along the way, did a lot of television, and now I get dragged in to do things like sweep up the floors and make sure that the lights are still on from time to time. In 2011, I wrote an article in Fortune that was called Inside Apple. The working title of the article was How Apple Works. And the whole point of the article was that this is an incredibly secretive company that has very deep and specific business processes that Apple doesn't want anybody to know about. And one of those processes is, if you're going to talk, and you really shouldn't be, but if you're going to talk about our products. That's all we want to communicate with the outside world about. Steve Jobs had an odd relationship with this subject. On the one hand, he believed that. On the other hand, he was very proud of the depth and breadth of Apple, and he wanted that story told as well. And so I published this article, very quickly turned it into a book. I was writing this book while Steve Jobs was very ill, and also while Walter Isaacson was writing his biography of Steve Jobs. So my book publisher and I were very aware of both of those things happening simultaneously. But the book turned out well. I actually published about 3 months after Jobs passed away, and I'm really pleased to say that I think the book holds up well today because it truly is an extraordinary company. I'm not going to dwell on it now, but I'm happy to talk to you about it afterwards, Alberto. And I'm also giving some serious thought to getting my publisher to reissue it and maybe doing a couple new chapters about what's happened since January 2012 when I published it. So after I was over the pain of publishing a book, I was casting about for my next book topic, and my editor actually suggested to me, and my book editor said, you really should do a book about Uber. It's the most exciting, most interesting company. It couldn't have existed without the cell phone. It's gone global more quickly than any startup could. I said, you're right, I'm going to do it. I knew Travis Kalanick a little bit, and I wrote him an email. And this was his response to me. I'll just read it quickly. I'm not sure if you're planning to write the book anyways, but I will make it clear to the folks I know not to cooperate. And if you are still persistent, I will find another writer to write an authorized book with full access to us to compete with yours. So wow. I want you to understand the mindset of a journalist. This was exciting. Right? This was good. Because this was from the moment I started the project, I had proof of his personality and of his behavior. And I moved this from the inbox to the folder. There's my first piece of documentary evidence of how Uber behaves. And to make a long story short, I was persistent, and for a variety of reasons, he changed his mind for better or worse and agreed to work with me. And I had a ton of access to him over the course of the writing of the book, and we can get into that too. People forget today that Uber didn't start with people driving around in Priuses and Camrys and Corollas. It started as a high-end limousine product. That was Uber's first idea. And the reason that is that the young guys who started Uber thought it would be cool to ride around in style in a limousine. Incidentally, they called the company Uber because the guy who thought up the idea, not Travis Kalanick, a guy named Garrett Camp, he really liked Mercedes S-Class cars, and his thought process was Mercedes, German, excellence, Uber. Turns out the San Francisco market where they started is dominated by Lincoln Town Cars, not Mercedes S-Classes. So this became the dominant feature of Uber in its early days. That's Travis Kalanick, famous now, not at all famous when Uber started. Lower middle class kid from the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, sort of simultaneously a decent athlete and a math nerd, and probably pretty conflicted as a result of that. Very good student, but always a hustler. I have a story in my book about him being very proud of the fact that he sold the most pancakes at an Indian Guides pancake competition. This was at a young age. I like that story because for all the headlines you see about Travis Kalanick, that makes total sense to everybody in the room, right? That he would have sold the most pancakes. This is Bolter Hall. It's a classroom building at UCLA where the computer engineering, computer science department is. It's relevant for a couple reasons. Actually, there's a room where one of the first nodes on what was then called the ARPANET existed. The transmission happened between UCLA and Stanford. The UCLA computer scientists are very proud of this because they say, hey, we had something to do with the starting of the internet too. It's not all up in Silicon Valley. The fact is, they had and have a real chip on their shoulder because everybody knows this is where the action is. That's not where the action is. It's also where the computer science undergrads, including Travis Kalanick and some of his buddies, hung out in a club that was sort of like their fraternity. Keep that theme in your mind. I'm going to come back to it. This is some of his buddies from those days at UCLA. He's right in the middle. Scour was the first company that he was involved with. He didn't start it. His friends did. It was sort of a pre-Napster. They were going to use the music that was on each other's computers in the dorm. Firewalls weren't what they are today. It caught on pretty quickly. Turned out you could network these computers beyond just the dorm at UCLA. You could go elsewhere at UCLA. You could go to your friends' college up at Berkeley or wherever. Problem was the music companies weren't real keen on this, and they sued Scour, and Scour died an ugly and fairly quick death, by the way, compared to Napster. Kalanick and one of his co-founders of Scour started another company called Red Swoosh. They were going to take the same technology, only they were going to sell it to record companies and other companies that had big needs for large media file transfers. I quoted in my book somebody who worked at Red Swoosh saying it was as if the pharmacist became, I ruined the joke. It's as if the drug dealer became a pharmacist, and that's why I have this silly slide. In case you haven't picked up on it yet, there's no real information in my slides. These are just pretty pictures for you to look at while I'm talking. Kalanick ended up selling Red Swoosh for what in the Valley would be considered a relatively small amount of money, and in 2007, 2008, bought a house near the Castro in San Francisco, which he called the Jam Pad. The Jam Pad was a place where he would invite his pals, mostly young men, to come over and jam. What did they jam on? They jammed on entrepreneurial ideas. It didn't matter what the idea was. It mattered that it was entrepreneurial. And as I thought about it, I thought the word jam was really interesting because 30 years prior to this, jamming in that neighborhood in San Francisco would have meant getting together and smoking some marijuana and playing music, right? But now the new music was coding and trying to become rich as an entrepreneur. This was what he was doing when his friend Garrett Camp had an idea. And this is really central to the idea of disruption and what's just crazy about what goes on in Silicon Valley in general. Camp was a young guy. He had sold a company called Stumble Upon. He made real money on that compared with Kalanick. And he hated San Francisco's taxis. He wasn't the only one. It was a pretty bad system, so it was a good place for something like Uber to start. Unlike most people who hated taxis, he was an engineer who understood that the second generation iPhone had a GPS chip and an accelerometer in it. And he knew what could be done with an accelerometer and a GPS chip. Mainly, he could design a really inexpensive taxi dispatch system. And that's what he did. He got a website. He called it Uber Cab. I already told you about the Uber part. And he started the company. He started the company. He came up with the idea. A little bit later, he got a few friends together and said, I could really use your help on this, and Travis Kalanick was one of them. Now, he later became the key guy. Camp, there's no controversy here, really. Camp stepped back and said, Travis, you're the guy. But keep that in mind every time you read about Kalanick being a co-founder. He is, in the way that Silicon Valley people talk about it, but he wasn't there at the beginning. So the beauty of Uber, everybody knows this now, but I give this talk in front of audiences that aren't as tech savvy as all of you. You didn't need to pull your wallet out to pay for your car. You just got out. It utilized a mass server system, and it didn't follow the rules. You know all about the controversies of not registering, not registering as a taxi company, and everything that happened after that. Uber, the startup, had a surprisingly sophisticated playbook. That's the X's and O's joke here, which was that they went into a city. They started in San Francisco. They went very early to Los Angeles and Chicago and Seattle. And as they did these new cities, they literally wrote it down in a playbook and said, when we go to new cities, we're going to run this playbook. And they did it scores of times. They also, as I said at the outset, went international more quickly. Sure. Yeah, great question. Part of it's very straightforward. They went to the biggest cities first, but they also, in the United States, but they also went places where they felt there was a robust tech community where they had personal connections. So that's why Seattle came before some bigger cities. That's why they went to Paris early, because they knew a lot of tech people in Paris from the Le Web conference that happens every year there. They figured they were very clever about evangelizing, calling up the people they knew, and going on Twitter, which was new at the time, and saying, hey, try this new thing. It was their guerrilla marketing. So great question. And they introduced something that in other quarters was not terribly controversial, called dynamic pricing. They called it surge pricing. The gasoline retailers have been doing this, airlines and hotels, for years. When Uber did it, people got upset. They got upset because they called it price gouging. And I just did a story last week that Regal Cinemas is experimenting with doing dynamic pricing. They're going to charge more for hit movies and less for flops as a way of getting people into the theater. I don't know if it's going to work, but I made the observation there's nothing controversial about dynamic pricing. It's controversial when you're so stubborn and insensitive that you don't lift it when there's a snowstorm or if there's been a terrorist shooting. And these are actual examples of ways that Uber screwed this up. In my book, I tell the story about Lyft. In the interest of time, I just want to remind those of you who have forgotten that it was Lyft that came up with the idea of people driving their own cars, totally amateur drivers. Uber was still totally focused on limousines at that point in 2012. As a matter of fact, Uber thought what Lyft was doing was against the rules, against the law, and they said so. But they saw that Lyft was getting traction, in particular in San Francisco, and that really pissed them off, and so they said, okay, we're going to do it too. They had raised a lot of money. They had an international network with their limousine system, so once they decided they were going to copy Lyft, and boy, they hate hearing that expression, that they were going to copy Lyft, they were able to very quickly surpass Lyft in what we all know now as UberX. And so this was Travis Kalanick wrote a white paper that said, we think this is against the law. This is Rodin thinking about it. But anyway, sorry, there's UberX. That's a Nissan, a 2002 Nissan Pathfinder, a Hunter Green Pathfinder. It's not my car, but I have the exact same car, and I drove for Uber while I was researching the book. And what I learned was that I really didn't like driving a car professionally. It's not at all glamorous the way I thought it was, and it made me really grateful that I do what I do for a living as opposed to driving people around. And I have a few anecdotes in the book about more precisely why I didn't like it. This is one of these slides that we could have shown you about Webvan or those companies in 2000. This tiny, well, not tiny, but this startup that doesn't even make money, that's far more valuable than all of these established companies. And this is my last slide, and I'll end and sit down and talk to Alberto and all of you by saying that when I published the book in May, the most common question I got was, well, how much were you able to get into the book of what's happened this year in 2017 so far? And my gag line, which became a literal line, was, well, I was able to get scandals 1 through 17 into the book, but not number 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and so on. So these are some of the actual scandals of the early part of 2017. You can't see them, Alberto, but if anybody wants to talk about any of them, I'll weigh in on them. I forgot to say, I used to have a slide at the end that I'm going to add here, which is that I'm at Adam Lashinsky on Twitter, and I'd love to hear your comments privately if you don't have time to give them publicly. So thank you.
Yeah. I feel incredibly privileged that Adam is taking the time to come and talk to us because this is the opposite. You know, Adam interviews people, and people don't necessarily interview Adam. And you interview some of the largest, most innovative tech leaders in the world, right?
I try, yes.
Next month you're going to be in China, right?
Yeah, so the first week of December, Fortune's having 2 conferences in Guangzhou, China. Guangzhou, in case you don't know, is what we used to call Canton. So Cantonese food comes from Guangzhou.
Yeah. And who are you interviewing?
I'm going to be interviewing Pony Ma, the CEO of Tencent, Terry Guo, the CEO of Foxconn.
Small companies.
Yeah, right, small companies.
Yeah. You know, just to get people in the audience, I want you guys to ask questions. But, you know, I worked at Apple, and I got a chance to work with Steve, and then when he left and came back, I worked with Bill Campbell as well. So it's interesting a little bit of how the Valley comes together. And, you know, we have all these, you know, leaders, and every has a very different style. You talk about Bill in one end. Everybody consider Bill a mentor. Steve, you know, so focused about driving, you know, excellence, and you know, we all have to define how our leadership comes about.
Yes, Steve wasn't a hugger the way Bill was.
I know. So, quick comment. So, what do you think are the key items for leadership that you talk to so many leaders right now, and what have you seen, and what do you instill in the audience to think about?
I'll tell you, based on the work that I've done over the last handful of years, I'm thoroughly confused on this subject, because if you spend time looking at someone like Steve Jobs, who was a very effective leader, and you look at, if you look at somebody like Jeff Bezos, who I've spent time with, or if you look at Tim Cook, or if you look at Bill Campbell, and then you look at Travis Kalanick, you realize, and all of those were successful with the exception, I think everyone would agree, of Kalanick, who was very successful at something, but ultimately his leadership has by no means stood the test of time. These are all very different people. So I could sit here and tell you that empathy is very important in a leader, but Steve didn't have much of it.
Yep.
I could tell you that you know that vision is extremely important in a leader, but Bill Campbell wasn't known for his brilliant strategic vision. So I find it difficult and frustrating to distill it down to just a few qualities. And I want to say one more thing. Well, I'm thinking, well, what are the other great companies? So I did a piece about a year ago on Mark Zuckerberg. He's proving to be an amazing leader for such a young man. He clearly has this ability to know when he's wrong and to change his mind. That's key. Jeff Bezos talks about that. But look at what Larry Page has done at Google twice now. He's essentially given up the top job because he didn't want to do it, which is possible, or because he decided he wasn't the best person for it. So I don't know. Maybe self-awareness is the number one most important thing.
Brad Smith.
You know, so I know Brad very well, but I haven't written substantively about Intuit in a long time. Fortune did, just in the current issue of Fortune, and what I'm amazed and astounded at what Brad has accomplished. And because he has white hair, I had no idea he was so young. He's a very young man at 53.
Yeah. Tesla.
So I wrote about Tesla today.
No wonder. Yeah.
And I had a little fun with them because, you know, I think they're going to do something like 3,000 units of. They're having trouble doing 3,000 units a week of the sedan, of the Tesla 3, the sedan 3, Model 3.
Model 3.
So I can't. I'm not going to pass judgment on them. What Elon Musk has accomplished is amazing. I said in my piece today, he's humiliated the entire auto industry by showing them that he had a better idea than they did. That said, that's not sufficient.
Correct.
And it's taking billions of dollars. It's going to take billions more dollars because he's Elon Musk. He's able to raise that money, but it's not going to be easy.
Yeah. Do you take an Uber to come here?
Today, I got that question when the book first came out all the time. This interviewer in Toronto asked me that, and I take Uber all the time, not out of any sense of loyalty. I do it for the same reason that I think many people in the country and in the world do it, because it's so damn convenient, the price is right, and the volume is so good. I drove my 2002 Nissan Pathfinder here today.
Questions from the audience? Are we ready? Great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't have a take that I think that is unique or that will surprise you, but I will try to give you a candid take based on my 20 years here. I'm very comfortable generalizing that most leaders haven't given it much thought. They've given it it has been a nice to have, not a need to have. So if they can have a diverse management team, great. But by the way, let's talk about the numbers, and let's talk about the product, and let's talk about who is most likely to get me the numbers and the product and so on. Now that's changing for a variety of reasons. Bill Campbell was a great champion of women in Silicon Valley. He spent a lot of time on that subject. I don't know how much he was able to I don't know how good his management team was. I know there were very prominent women, for example. Anyway, that's my short answer.
Additional questions? There? Yeah.
Yeah, Eugenio Salu from Microsoft. What's your perspective around how much those leaders make decisions based on intuition versus data or knowledge?
Well, the thing that I've learned about recently is that I think people, I don't manage a lot of people, so I just write about these people. And the thing I've learned recently that has made a big impact on me is that people in positions of authority are starting to learn that the data isn't as straightforward as they thought it was, right? That the data is highly influenced by the decisions that they make and that the decisions of people before them have made. I think people are starting to wake up to that. Because I think what your question is getting at is that people, especially around here, are very proud of themselves. They say, we listen to the data, and that will guide us to the right decision. Well, they're finally beginning to understand the data is great, but it's not good enough.
You have developed some skills about communicating and connecting with people through words. I mean, a lot of us in our daily lives, we're dealing with all sorts of types of communication. What are some tips that we can get from you've learned through these years about how to make our own writing better and our own style of communication?
Thank you for that question. They're two different questions. So, and I've worked very hard at my writing. I was not a natural writer, to my father's great frustration. My father was educated at the University of Chicago on this great books program in the late 40s and early 50s, and he's a very good writer and a very good editor. And it annoyed him that I was not a good writer. What I was good at was reporting. From the beginning, I was good at going out and talking to people. I have the gift of gab more than my father. And I love getting the information. If I had my druthers, I'd say to somebody else, "Here, you write it." But I had to learn to write, and I had to learn different styles of writing too. There's news writing is one style, and magazine feature writing, telling stories, is another style. So I can give you one piece of writing advice. It's use fewer words. So, and make your sentences shorter. So that seems like simplistic advice, but it really works. The number one mistake that bad writers make is that their sentences are too complicated. And they try too hard to use fancy words. And so if you write short declarative sentences, and if you take your long sentences and you chop them up into smaller sentences, you'll have better writing. And you'll probably find that the second and third part of the sentence wasn't necessary after all. So that's by the way, on my good days, so I write a daily column, and it's called Data Sheet. You don't want to know the sausage making of how that thing gets written. My wife particularly doesn't want you to know about how late at night sometimes I do it. But on good days, I try very hard to make it 350 words. exactly 350 words. And I can take, if I have time, I can take a 420 word piece and make it a 350 word piece, and it'll be better every single time. So that's and let me just tell you about, spoken communications. I mean, what I've learned the skill that I've had to learn as a journalist is to listen more carefully and to be comfortable with silence. And so, Alberto's seen me interview people on stage. I'll ask a question, and then it takes a little bit of maturity. It has taken maturity for me to learn how to shut up and let the person answer.
Thank you. Jorge Escobar, San Jose City College. A quick question. How do we create more Uber owners and funders, less Uber drivers in Silicon Valley?
Wow.
More Uber owners, and do you mean like investors, shareholders, or do you mean people? You want entrepreneurs as opposed to people driving a car? Yeah. Again, that's another one that I'm very conflicted on. So I'll say a bit of heresy for you, which is that I feel that there's a cult of the entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. I don't think you're going to like this, Alberto, and I think that it takes a certain kind of person to be an entrepreneur, and that they're the people who should be entrepreneurs. But I think we put a lot of pressure here in the Valley. We think everybody should be one, and I don't think everyone should be one. For example, I think some people's aspirations should be to get a really good, secure, no such thing as safe, right? But a job that has good long-term trajectory, which, frankly, being an entrepreneur doesn't. So my hat's off to people who want to risk it all and be an entrepreneur, but I don't want to pressure young people into thinking that that's the only admirable thing you can be. For example, we as a society need to figure out how to make it really exciting and rewarding to be a school teacher, as opposed to trying to be Travis Kalanick.
Yeah.
And if you'll indulge me, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I thought very seriously about being a history professor because I love history, and I thought that would be a cool job for me. But I was really, as a 22-year-old, I was really worried that I would be bored, that I needed more action. And so I went out and found something that would give me more action. But that was my thought process.
Rosa?
Hi, thank you for your time and very interesting overview of the companies that you've written about. Operating with a purpose is something that attracts many individuals to corporations, gives them inspiration, makes them want to come into work and do their best. Operating with a purpose can be great for a company, like with Apple, a company that you wrote about. It could also be a company's Achilles heel, like Uber. Many of us lead many teams. We want to make sure that they operate with a purpose. How do you see operating with a purpose? Any tips around, here's what you should do to operate with a purpose, and here's some things that you should look out for in operating with a purpose, because it could lead to things like what happened at Uber.
Rosa is one of the CTOs of Bank of America. So,
oh, wonderful!
Yeah.
Great. So I have a cover story in the current issue of Fortune on Salesforce.com and Mark Benioff, and so Benioff is a unique individual. They broke the mold and threw it away after he was made. But he's leading right now both his own company and the industry and industry by making the argument that you can in fact lead with purpose. You can have a purpose, and so I think he's one model, not the only one. It's interesting. Apple's vision of what purpose meant was building these great products. They were not particularly philanthropic as a company. They weren't even particularly nice as a company, and Jobs was completely comfortable with that. He didn't even like the idea of corporate philanthropy. He said, we should make a lot of money for the shareholders and let them go spend it on causes that they think are important. Tim Cook has totally disagreed with that. I think he personally believes in corporate philanthropy. He also believes that especially younger employees want it. So, and I would just so I think the answer. I think where you want to go with this. If this is important to you, you have a tailwind in that young people anecdotally want this. So when companies stand for something good, that's attractive as a recruiting technique. But I would just offer that we journalists certainly, and the rest of us, get seduced by these success stories. And we tend to think, well, they're successful and they have a purpose. We can do it just like them. The key is what happens when the you-know-what hits the fan. Are they still so wonderful? And for some of these companies, it's too soon to say.
David.
Apple, Uber, phenomenal companies. You look over the next 3 years, what companies do you find fascinating or that you potentially will be riding on or whatever? Very curious.
So the conventional wisdom right now, and the conventional wisdom in my business changes every 3 or 4 weeks. But the conventional wisdom right now is that the five or so biggest tech companies are sucking all the oxygen out of the room. There's no room for anybody else. I find that to be fundamentally wrong. Although it's a very good story and it's a very interesting story, and it's not to deny that those 5 or so companies are very powerful and bear watching, right? So, but this isn't my specialty. So I tend to I pride myself on, for example, you're not supposed to say anything bad about the competition. I don't read TechCrunch. Period. I don't look at it. And the reason I don't is that, they feel compelled to write about every single funding round, every single little startup that's ever started. And that's too much noise for me. So I wait for some filters to happen first before I get excited. I find that if I listen carefully to my network, I can still find these companies when they're small enough. So I wrote the first big story in Fortune on Facebook in 2005. I did something on Twitter in 2008. I did something on YouTube when they were still above a pizza shop in San Mateo. In each instance, the cool kids, the people who follow these things carefully, they thought that was old news. Twitter, we know all about that. It was tiny. So, right now, everyone's paying very careful attention to artificial intelligence and to see who's going to win that battle, if anyone. For a variety of reasons, we're all paying very careful attention to China. So a year ago, I couldn't have really told you what Alibaba does. Now I know. 2 years ago, I met with Huawei. They told me they were going to make a major push into smartphones. And I said, yeah, sure. You're like a Cisco competitor. They have number one market share of smartphones in China today. So artificial intelligence and China, those are the things that are exciting my colleagues and me the most right now.
Somebody else there. Yeah.
Hi, as a reporter, I imagine you must be an expert in building trust because people tells you things that wouldn't otherwise share. Any suggestions or tips about how to connect with people and build trust?
What a great group, by the way, of great questions, which is a stalling technique, by the way, when you get a hard question. I mean, I'm from the Midwest. My parents are from the Midwest. I have 2 older sisters. We grew up at the dinner table talking to each other. I mean, I don't know if you can teach trust, or if you can teach techniques around it. I do think there's techniques, and I'll give you an example of my business. I learned this from a dear friend of mine who was an editor at Fortune, and we were partners in crime. Stephanie Mehta. We were partners in crime on our conference for many years. We were that illusory. Maybe this expression is not politically correct anymore, but we were each other's work spouses. We finished each other's sentences in meetings and whatnot. It was great. And we trusted each other a ton. But she taught me something. When she was a writer doing feature stories, she would call the person that the story was about before publication, and she would go over every fact and quote in the story. And she knew there were going to be some arguments. And her attitude was, let's have those arguments now before it's published, and we have to have those arguments afterwards, and there's going to be hurt feelings. Let's have the hurt feelings now while there's time to do something about it. Well, oh man, did that generate trust, including when there were arguments, including when there were bad feelings as a result of those conversations. At the end of the day, every single one of those people, and this is true for me, I like to think today, says, Well, gee, I really appreciate that you told me what you were going to do. I really appreciate you plunged the knife right between the chest plate
Yeah.
rather than in my back, right? So that's one thing from my career, and there must be things that other people have in theirs that are applicable.
No, she's first, then you're next. Yeah.
Hi, Adam.
Hi.
My question is, outside of the area, the people that you interview, who will be the dream person that you would like to interview in the whole world, and why?
Wow, that's a great question. We have one more question, and then we're going to have to end up. So we have that one plus one. So I don't know if she wants to take the mic. I'll give you some time for that one.
Thank you. I mean, I've been in my little world. I've been very blessed. I've interviewed almost everybody that we've that you can imagine that I would want to have interviewed. I haven't even interviewed Elon Musk, and I'd like to, but I'll go ahead and say the obvious. I guess this is hubris, because I'm the guy who's gonna really do it. But I guess I would like to sit down and interview Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did interview Trump once, many years ago. I wrote a piece in Fortune in 2004 when The Apprentice was first popular. I did a piece that said, why are we celebrating a guy whose gambling businesses are on the verge of bankruptcy? Why do we think he's some sort of business genius? And I called him up and said I was going to write this article, and he got on the phone, and he gave me his comments, and it was, you can read it. It was some cockamamie stuff about interest rates being different in New Jersey than they were in Manhattan. But that's, to me, I mean, I'm giving you like what Time Magazine used to call the Man of the Year award. The Man of the Year, now Person of the Year, is not necessarily the most admirable person of the year, but the biggest newsmaker. And sure, I'd love to sit down with him and ask him a few questions.
And he uses good social media, right? Go ahead.
My name is John Canella. I work as an IT engineer with a focus in security, network security. And we talked about trust, we talked about emerging technologies and writing. And one of the things that I'm reading a lot on is cryptocurrencies. And it seems like everyone's trying to be their own expert. And what do you think about that emerging technology, cryptocurrency, blockchain? What do you think about all these people that claim to be experts? And do you see it prospering?
So, cryptocurrency, things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it's just a huge accomplishment for me that I can even say that, is the first time in my career where I've truly felt old. And so things have come along in my career that I've worked really hard to understand, and I've gotten to a level where I'm comfortable that I've understood it as well as I'm going to, and as well as I think I need to. And so semiconductors would be an example of that. I have no idea what semiconductors do, but back in 97, 98, 99, I spent a lot of time trying. And I think I got to where I needed to be able to talk about it as a financial journalist. Cryptocurrency, I'm not there yet, and I am trying. We got a bunch of young people at Fortune who are extremely excited about this. They write articles. I read the articles in draft form, and I tell them I don't understand what you're writing. And I say, and that's a problem, because you've got to make me understand it in this article. And so we're not there yet. I'm very consciously humble about this topic. I am trying not to be dismissive about it. And I was, I for example, I defy anyone in this room to explain the value of Bitcoin. And we have these arguments internally. It doesn't have any value. It has a price, which is different. But I mean, it's a complicated topic, right? Same with a stock and a pair of shoes and a bar of gold. But so anyway, I'm trying.
Three questions in order to finish. Quick answers. So
this is the lightning round.
Cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah. If I want to know what's going on in cybersecurity, I'm going to call you.
No, I know that, but you interview Keith Alexander. You had the wonderful event in Brain Tech and all that, and something we got to take serious.
I guess there's. I guess I'm thinking about it from my perspective. There's no, and I know this is what you're working very hard on. There's no breakout winner. Yeah. There's no company that you would say is the company. Well, okay, and you must work at Cisco.
Okay, she.
But
Yeah, yeah.
so, and you know, and good for you, right? But so I don't know if we'll, I don't know if we'll get there or not.
Global competitiveness. You know, the U.S. used to export a lot of manufacturing, oil, and all that. Our top 5 companies are technology companies. How do we do? How do we deal with China? How do we deal with the competition?
I'm very optimistic about that subject more than I'm sort of more optimistic than I think the zeitgeist is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm old enough to remember the 1980s when the Japanese were taking over everything and we were going to become the United States was going to become a nation of hamburger flippers,
Yep.
and it didn't happen for a variety of reasons. The United States did quite well coming out of that environment. I'm very patriotic and bullish about the United States for all the usual reasons. And I'm not just playing to this crowd. I've said this for a long time. One of the reasons I'm so bullish about the United States is our culture of immigration. I lived in Japan. One of Japan's primary problems is that it has a culture of anti-immigration. You don't need to put any value judgments behind it. They do not allow immigrants to help them grow. We do. It's been one of our great strengths, not our only strength. So that would be something I'm very concerned about. But I'm even optimistic about that. We can't stop being a nation of immigrants, and we won't. Although we might have some real policy hiccups. And so China has huge advantages, obviously, right now in terms of growth, but they have some severe disadvantages that they're going to have to negotiate that we might not have to negotiate. I don't want to be naive. I know we have plenty of problems. But
so the last thing is,
I'm bullish.
A lot of people have not heard of Brainstorm Tech. What is it that you do, and what is the objective that you have? Because it's not just an event in Aspen; it's a global event. So I want to give you an opportunity to explain what you're trying to accomplish with that.
Thank you. Brainstorm Tech is an annual event in Aspen that brings together technology industry leaders, from corporate executives to entrepreneurs to investors, to talk about the most important issues in the technology industry at that time, and to talk to each other. And as you say, we're doing the first Brainstorm Tech International in Guangzhou in a month. That's the first time we'll have taken the franchise outside the United States, but we also do dinners at CES in January in San Francisco, and we're kicking around a lot of ideas about how we're going to make it into more of a community that you join as a member as opposed to attending an event. It's I think I'm entering my 10th year of running it, which is a scary number, and that's a lot of conference calls over 10 years. But it's something I'm very proud of, because you two you come to Aspen, which is a beautiful place, in the third week of July. It's beautiful anytime. It's particularly beautiful in the third week of July. Yeah. And there's just something special. We like to say that it's like a destination wedding experience. It's a little bit difficult to get to Aspen unless you have a private jet, which most of us, and even most of our attendees don't, although a few do. And because it's difficult to get to, you tend to stay. Mm-hmm. And so we all go to conferences in places like New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco, and the true big shots, the people with the private jets, tend to come in and then leave. At our conference, they tend to come and stay, which we're very proud of.
Yeah, we were very fortunate. Adam, part of him coming to HITEC is he's very committed to diversity and leadership and innovation. I was fortunate. I was invited, thanks to Patricia and Adam, to participate in the event. It was amazing. It was Who's Who of the industry.
Thank you.
So we're going to try to figure out how we can include more members of HITEC. Yeah. To make sure that we have that true representation. And
excuse me, Alberto, if I could just tell everybody one thing about inclusion and diversity. This year, on the opening night of the conference, I interviewed General Stanley McChrystal, former Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Afghanistan, before he was fired very ignominiously because of an article that appeared in Rolling Stone magazine. And he talked about that night. There was not you could have heard a pin drop when he talked about how he handled this humiliation after a 32-year career of serving his country. And he said while we were on stage, and by the way, how many of you are active duty military in the audience? And no hands went up. He turned to me and he said, you really need active duty military in this room. He said, you should have 15 next year. And I said, I don't know if I can commit to 15, but I do commit to having some active duty military next year. So, you know, right, just and we had this great town hall on gender equality in Aspen. Just when you think you're paying attention to the right things, you find someone else reminds you, well, here's something else. So this is something that is good for continuous improvement.
I gotten a chance to. I sit on a board with Stan McChrystal.
Oh, I didn't know.
And he almost cried. He actually cried in the stage because you pointed out an impeccable career, and just for an article and something, he said, "Look, I screwed up," and it's all about leadership. So he didn't make any excuses, but it was amazing. So those moments are unique, and you had that special way of getting people to lower their head down and just tell them how it is. I really thank you for taking the time. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. I hope this is not just your first appearance. We would love to have you back in the appropriate time. And now, you should all try to subscribe to his Twitter handle and his daily, newsletter. It's amazing. You get a quick snapshot of what's going on in our industry. So thank you again, Adam.
Thank you, Alberto. And Patricia.